Hey everyone, so this video is on selective breeding. The learning intentions of this video is to understand how selective breeding can influence a gene pool and to identify some of the issues with selective breeding. So selective breeding is a process in which humans use breeding to develop desired traits in the offspring of selected parents. In other words, we pick two parents with a trait that we want and we mate them together to make offspring that also have that trait. And over time, we end up with a generation that are all exhibiting the trait that we're after. So for example, if we selected to start off with two wolves, and this is something that really happened, we selected wolves that had a much more calmer demeanor to mate in an effort to hope that their offspring also had calm demeanors. Now, over time, that selective breeding is then merged to looking at things like color of coat, the height of the dog, or even its behavior. And we're selecting parents that have those traits to hopefully make offspring with those traits as well. So selective breeding is an example of artificial selection. So we don't always promote traits which have the highest fitness. In other words, they're not always the traits that would help this organism survive the best in the wild. And that's completely opposite to natural selection. Natural selection is entirely based upon fitness, and the phenotypes are usually the best suited for survival and reproduction in the environment. So for example, natural selection with giraffes, obviously we trended towards having a long neck, and that was the best suited for the environment the giraffe was found in. If we were thinking about it in terms of selective breeding, and we can look at corn as an example, we've selectively bred the corn to be much larger, to have a greater number of kernels, and that may not necessarily be the best for wild corn. It's something that we have selectively bred for our own benefit. So how does it work? So for selective breeding, we identify which parents have the phenotype that is desired, and we start to breed them together. And what should hopefully happen is that the generation afterwards should show an increase in the frequency, or the percentage, I guess, of that phenotype. Now, the way I said hopefully is because we know that sometimes the parents with the phenotype may be carriers for phenotypes that we don't want. So it isn't always 100% going to happen. So we repeat the process over and over, and eventually we end up with a generation that is expressing the desired phenotype. So you can see in this diagram, we've got two parents that are identified as being, let's say, tall, and we're going to breed those two parents together. And you can see that our second population, there's a greater frequency now of taller plants. And so this is the same, for example, picking dogs with certain coat colors, picking organisms that may produce more meat. We're picking parents that we know have the trait that we're after in an effort to hope that the next generation increases the number of, I guess, that phenotype. So if we had population 3, we might then pick the two tallest trees from population 2 and mate them together, and so on and so forth, until eventually, by let's say population 10, we had nearly all tall trees. So some examples, we've touched on corn. So we've selected corn that obviously produces a large amount of produce. Even things like pugs, you can see here that we have a pug from 1880, and it's a lot different to what a modern day pug looks like. And that's because it's been selectively bred to look the way it has. So we've selected maybe parents that had curlier tails, that had more squished faces, that were smaller and lower to the ground, in an effort to hope that their following offspring also exhibit those traits. We also use them for things like in agriculture. And here you can see we've got cows that are producing a much larger amount of meat, maybe greater muscle, leaner meat, because it's a desired trait. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best for the cow. It's not the best fitness for the cow, but it's a desired trait that we're after. So some of the issues, selective breeding reduces genetic diversity. We're actually eliminating genes from the gene pool, and it means that the offspring are less able to survive in changing conditions. So if there was, for example, a disease, we might have eliminated that gene from the gene pool through selective breeding. Another issue is that some traits or genes are linked together, and we may actually carry some undesirable traits across with it as well. So for example, we wanted tall dogs, that may also be linked to the color. So we might get an unwanted color every single time we try and get tall dogs. So some of those traits are linked together. So in review, selective breeding is a process used by humans, which we develop offspring with desirable phenotypic traits, and relies on mating parents who display those traits, and we eventually get an increase in its frequency in following generations. So again, this is a driver of evolution, but it's on an artificial way. It's a human-based process. I hope this video helped.